Shaykh Rabi', Hafidhahullah ta'ala, may Allah preserve him and give him a long life and cause the Muslims and mankind to benefit from him. He said, as for bombs and all other weapons of destruction, warplanes, tanks, long-range missiles, you are the ones who have engineered and manufactured them with your satanic minds that only think about transgression, animosity, oppression, attacking, tyranny, conquering entire races of people and enslaving them, spilling their blood, usurping their natural resources, which is exactly what they do. And they've been doing for close onto a millennium. You think only about annihilating those who oppose you and stand in the way of your greed, and those who stand in the way of your greedy aspirations. Your oppression and spreading of hatred. Anyone who stands in the way of that, you annihilate them and you push them out their way. You usurp the rights of others and you enslave them, either financially or other than financially. All this wrapped up in the name of civilization, human rights, freedom and justice. What liberation? What human rights? What freedom and what justice? When the greatest of Allah's creation, the one that you know who was upon the greatest of moral characters, that you lie upon him and you claim that he is the one who is the terrorist, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone who does not know this should read about your history and your occupation of numerous nations, or read the history, your horrible, terrible history. Your history that has been written by your own selves and your own people. Not written by us, by your own people and your own historians. Just by looking at that history, you will know the reality of their death and their destruction and their oppression. For example, the number of fatalities in the First World War reached, as has been reported by their own people, 10 million. And that, ya ikhwan, is just their soldiers. 10 million. Never mind the number of civilians that were killed just in the First World War. And they were the elite of the nation's youth. And more than twice this number had incurred serious, debilitating and disabling injuries. This was just in the First War. 10 million, ya ikhwan. Then, looking at your Second World War, the number of people that were killed in the Second World War reached 17 million. And with another 18 million civilians. 17 million in soldiers or military personnel, and 18 million civilian fatalities. All of them killed in a period of 5.5 years. And then you're going to accuse the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and caricature him as a terrorist and a mass murderer. 18 million civilians, 17 million military personnel. The mind boggles at the amount of death and destruction that has been caused just in the 20th century. Just in the 20th century. In the 20th century alone, more people were killed by them, by the so-called civilized West. More people were killed by them in the 20th century alone than in the whole of the history of the world. And in the whole of the history of the world. 10 million. Add another 10 million in the First World War. 17 million. Add another 18 million. And the expenses that they spent, expenses that could sustain a whole nation, was spent in this type of war. Added to this are the number of entire cities that were destroyed, the amount of earth that was scorched by their burning, the agriculture that was flooded, and the factories and the plantations that stopped production, not to mention the number of livestock that were destroyed or lost. And just if one person was to focus upon the case study of Hiroshima, as one of them mentioned, and perhaps it is appropriate, he says, to speak about just the first atomic bomb. We made it? Did the messenger make it? Did the Muslims make it? Did the Muslims drop it? It was them. A civilized nation upon a so-called another civilized nation. They dropped the bomb upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let us relay what was reported by one representative of the Red Cross. He said, and suddenly there appeared these intense, muddy, pinkish lights, accompanied by an unnatural tremor. This was immediately followed by by an asphyxiating wave of heat and violent winds that ravaged everything in their path. Within only a few seconds, thousands of people who walked the roads or sat in the city's main streets were burnt alive. A great number were then killed by the intense heat that spread all over. Others were left lying on the ground, screaming in pain, with deadly burns all over their bodies. Are we talking about, ya ikhwan, about military personnel and combatants? We're talking about civilians. Men, women, children, young and old. We're talking about agriculture and animals and cattle that were killed in this disaster, in this so-called civilized action that they claimed that they had no choice except to do. He says, others or anything that had been at the point of impact, walls, homes, factories and other buildings were completely and totally annihilated, with all traces of these things sent hurling into the sky in a ghastly whirlwind. And then he continues to mention some of the other matters that took place just in the bombing of this matter. So with what moral high ground do you accuse the Muslims? With what moral high ground do you attack the Messenger of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu